This is far more pleasant than being out there. Howdy. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate.
How are you? No. Wait. No, Drew, the light's on. It's like being at the Gabba looking into the stands. Jeez, that's... Oh. Testing 1, 2, David Crisafulli, Jared Blay, testing 1, 2, 3. Good to go. All good, Deck? The LNP is today calling on both the Premier and the Prime Minister to put 50-50 health funding back on the National Cabinet agenda. This was the single biggest issue the Premier discussed in the lead-up to the federal election. In fact, there were dozens of occasions where both the Premier and senior ministers not only said how important 50-50 funding was, they actually said that only a change of government in Canberra would deliver it. Well, the only thing a change of government in Canberra has delivered is silence from the State Labor Party. It's almost as though the issue no longer matters. 50-50 funding mightn't be important for the Premier anymore, but it still is for Queenslanders, and we are going to continue to fight for it, because the last thing we want to see is Queenslanders having a crumbling health system that's been in deterioration for nearly 8 years and no improvement in sight. And we've put solutions on the table, and one of them is better resources, and we're going to fight for that. Before I ask the Deputy Leader to discuss some of the issues that we have seen come to light about cuts to the PA and that leaked email that has come to the opposition, and we thank the whistleblowers for it, I'll make one point really, really clearly. I will trust doctors and nurses fighting for patient survival over a Premier and a Health Minister fighting for their political survival every day of the week. We believe them, we back them, and we're going in to fight for them. Over to you, Jared.
Thank you, Leader, and good afternoon, Jared Blay, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Well, what we saw this morning with the Health Minister jumping up at a press conference just before the Premier is an ignorant safety blanket for the Premier. That's what this government does now. It's their narrative. They are creating an ignorance safety blanket for Anastasia Palaszczuk. We saw it this morning with the Health Minister jumping up just before the Premier at a press conference to talk about the email that had been leaked out showing the Palaszczuk government as cutting funding to hospitals in Queensland in the sum of $9 million, and then the Premier getting up slightly later on an announcement, a pretty significant health announcement about vaccines, not joined by her Health Minister. Ordinarily, the Health Minister would be with the Premier for such a big announcement as they're making out. But Anastasia Palaszczuk was asked about that this morning, the budget cuts in her government, and she said along the lines, well, I understand my Health Minister addressed that this morning, but just conveniently hadn't seen or heard what her Health Minister had said. So this is a complete ignorance safety blanket now that government ministers are showing for the embattled Health Minister, Yvette D'Arth, and Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Premier. I want to comment on the story that's running today and we saw yesterday with respect to budget cuts at a hospital. This is significant. This is an email from a whistleblower that we had received that shows clinicians are showing $9 million budget cut to frontline services. The government would have you believe this is not the case. Well, my message would be clear to the government. It's time the Palaszczuk government cut with the lies and started believing people and stopped cutting funding from our hospital and health services. So we've got clinicians now in black and white talking about the funding cuts, and the Palaszczuk government saying it's not the case. Well, it is absolutely the case. So I'd say to Yvette D'Arth, who stood up just this morning, just before the Premier, it's time the Palaszczuk government started cutting the lies and stopped cutting health funding in Queensland.
David. Over to you.
The government this morning says that it's not a funding cut at all, that's just the opposition using trickery, because what's actually happened is they've overspent their budget. Rather than your weekly budget's $100, you spend $130, you've overspent your budget, it's not a budget cut per se.
But how disappointing that a government would do this and push back against doctors and nurses after all they've been through. And in the end, it's in black and white, and you only have to read the email to feel the heartfelt plea. And you only have to read the email to realise how sudden this is. And when you hear a frontline staff member say that the cut is the equivalent to removing 2 wards in the middle of a health crisis, is it any wonder why frontline staff feel so broken and battered?
Can you actually call it a budget cut though? It's someone who's overspent their budget?
It's in black and white, and it's the frontline staff. It's the people who deliver the service at the front line, and they are asking for them to cut $9 million. And it's a playbook we've seen before. And if you cast your mind back to before the budget last year, we raised exactly this same issue about cuts to the health and hospital network, and the government said exactly the same thing and then quietly backpedalled once doctors and nurses came forward. And we're going to do the same thing again. And as the emails come through from whistleblowers, and this won't be just at the PA, as it comes through from whistleblowers, we will continue to raise it and we'll be fighting for the same response. You can't ask frontline staff to make a cut and somehow suggest that it's not a cut to the front line. They don't have any capacity to hand back money. They're the ones who are delivering the beds. They're the ones who are delivering the services. They are the front line. You don't get any more front line than doctors and nurses, and you don't get any more impassionate than this email asking staff to just go one more time and try and find a way through because of a decision that, quite frankly, is mean-spirited and mad.
In terms of if they have to spend more money than they've been allocated, though, is that not just a budget overspend as opposed to a budget cut?
Think about all that these staff have been through. Think about what they have had to do to hold a health system together after nearly 8 years of poor planning. And the state government said 3 years ago that they were going to properly resource the hospitals ahead of COVID. Well, the figures don't lie, and when ambulance ramping is at 44%, the worst in the nation, you know that that is a symptom of a system of a hospital that's overflowing. The extra beds, the extra resources haven't been added. And now the government's asking...
The resourcing question, that's a separate issue. This is a separate thing. Is it the budget overspend or is it the budget cut?
It's in black and white. It's staff being told at the front line to remove $9 million, the equivalent of 2 wards. The front line don't have the capacity to say that they've got fat. They are at the front line. They are delivering services as Queenslanders need it. You don't get any more front line than the PA. It's one of our flagship hospitals in this state. The level of service that is provided there, the specialities that are provided there, they are Queensland health heroes. And for them now to be thrown under the bus because of a government that, quite frankly, has run out of money and is conducting itself in a mean-spirited way, well, that's just madness. In the middle of a health crisis, to ask the frontline staff to cut $9 million, the equivalent of 2 wards, well, it's like getting blood from a stone. They just don't have any more capacity. These are the people at the front line, and the government has to acknowledge, and like they have done previously when we put the pressure on them, they must backtrack on this.
In terms of getting more funding out of the federal government and 50/50 funding, would you, if you were the Premier right now, would you use this coal compensation and the energy discussions as a bargaining chip to try to get that 50/50 funding?
There were no caveats before the election. It was change the government in Canberra and we'll change the health funding. The only thing that's changed is the state government's passion for sticking up for Queensland. Nothing else has changed. So I just dispense with all of the arguments, all of the nonsense, and just say if 50/50 was good enough when there was a blue government in Canberra, it's good enough now that there's a red government in Canberra. And I'll point to our record on this. Our position has been 100% consistent. We were happy to take the fight to an LNP government in Canberra, and we're happy to take the fight to a Labor government in Canberra, because in the end, we should be there for Queenslanders. And if 50/50 funding was good enough before the federal election, it sure as heck is good enough afterwards. And the only person whose opinion has changed on that is the Premier, who all of a sudden believes that political colour should be more important than the colour of the money to fix the health system.
So would you use something like the energy discussions as a bargaining chip?
I'd use the relationship and the commitments that were made before the election to deliver our fair share. The Premier stood beside the Prime Minister and said on many occasions that a change of government in Canberra would bring a change of funding arrangement. The only thing that's changed is the desire of the Queensland State Government to get their fair share for our state.
What should the Premier be saying now?
Show us the money and do what good governments do, and that is take up the fight to Canberra regardless of the political colouring of the day. And to see the Premier backtrack on what was the single biggest reason she gave Queenslanders to change the government, that smacks of putting politics ahead of people, and in this case, ahead of patients. In the middle of the Queensland health crisis, we need every dollar, we need every bit of our fair share, and the last thing we need is cuts to the front line.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Ta-ra.